I'm going to get started now just so that I'll have enough time to present. So good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Amber, and I'll be presenting my presentation for our Bringing the Lessons Home internship. This is an internship that is focused on learning the Holocaust information and just understanding it and learning what happened so that we can prevent it for the future. So my presentation is called Redemption, Overcoming the Unthinkable. Before we go forward, let's establish what the unthinkable actually is. This exhibit will explain the devastation of the Holocaust, more importantly, overcoming and pushing through such a horrifying time period. Background. Before we start the presentation, what do you all know about the Holocaust? What are your thoughts, knowledge, emotions that come to mind when you hear the word Holocaust? You can either unmute yourself or type it in the chat.
For me, it's sadness because of what they all endured and what they had to go through, and actually going to the museum, you can see that it's a lot of sadness that's there.
Thank you for your input. Does anyone else want to say anything before I go forward? I'm going to go to the next slide now. So let's go into what the Holocaust actually is. The word derives from the Greek word holocauston, which means a burnt sacrifice to God. The Holocaust was the genocide of 6 million Jews during World War II, specifically looking at the time period from 1933 to 1945. On this slide, there's just some pictures depicting the Holocaust in a general form. On the smaller picture shows a concentration camp in France because it wasn't just in Germany, it was in multiple places around the world. And then the other side of the picture shows propaganda from the Holocaust. The beginning. This Holocaust didn't start with everyone just going to a concentration camp. You can track it back as far as the Great War, which is the first World War I. And that lasted from 1914 to 1918. This is when Germany really lost its stability once they lost the war. And with their country going through so much damages, they needed a hero, a knight in shining armor, someone to save the day, which transformed their entire country. For them at this time, that person was Hitler, Adolf Hitler. He was born April 20th, 1889, and for all my astrology people, he was a Taurus. He moved to Germany after World War I, and he was a part of the German army. In the picture to the left of the screen, you can actually see him. He is sitting next to the dog on the far left. And he was initially part of the German Worker Party, but he gained influence and moved up his rank and demanded more change in a position where he could enact that change that he wanted. Hitler's rise. In 1933, he was a part of the German Workers' Party, but he actually was appointed Chancellor of Germany because of his views and how he was able to use his speech skills to tell people about the way that he could change Germany's financial situation because they were going through hyperinflation. He began to transform Germany's democracy from the inside out. Initially, Germany was a democracy, which means that they did have a president that was ruling. However, that president died, President Hindenburg, and at that point, Hitler proclaimed himself the Führer of Germany, which is basically a dictator of Germany, a tyrant. This brings us into anti-Semitism becoming a very big part of Germany. I'll start with a quote by Anne Frank. It's a very popular quote, so you all may have heard it before. It's really a wonder that I haven't dropped all my ideals, because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yeah, I keep them, because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. Despite the optimism of Anne Frank, not everyone in Germany believed that everyone was good at heart. Specifically, many Nazi party individuals believed that Jews were not good and they had a deep hatred and prejudice towards Jewish people. This is known as anti-Semitism. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see two posters displaying anti-Semitism, and it's blaming the Jews for the war, World War II. These are just some more examples of the way they would depict Jews as the cause of all their issues. They have many Jews are not welcome signs that you can see on the left side of the screen. And then you can also see different ways that they would try to instill these values in children. They would have it in children's book, warning them against the danger of Jews, have lots of pictures around so that many children can see that Jews were the enemy. And it started at such a young age. This brings us into the rise of Nazism. It was founded in 1920, which it came from the German Worker Party. And once Hitler took over, he kind of changed the ideals to go along more with what he believed, and it formed the Nazi Party. It was set on radical political ideals, and they had an extreme reaction to anti-Semitism, the distaste for the Treaty of Versailles, which is basically the treaty that came from the end of World War One, and they didn't like it because Germany did lose a lot from that war. And they had concerns of the nation's moral standards. They really wanted a nation that was filled with pure Germans, which I'll get into a little bit more in the presentation, but pure Germans are a specific type of people, and they wanted their organization to focus, their country to only have those type of people. Initially, the Nazi Party was not very popular in Germany and only had 2.5 to 3% of the nation's votes. However, as Adolf Hitler began to persuade more people and give more speeches, he initiated a plan to save Germany, and a lot of people began to follow his ideals because their country was going through so much at the time period. And one of the most popular techniques was propaganda. Propaganda is basically using different images or spreading a message that is not necessarily true to push a political agenda. This is the way that the Nazis really reached out to a lot of their country, and they tried to persuade them against Jews. Like they had different Nazi propaganda films making Jewish people the enemy. They had lots of political cartoons that made Jewish people the enemy, posters to support Hitler, and they gave different speeches, as you can see down here. Joseph Goebbels was a minister that would always speak on propaganda and just pushing the Nazi agenda. They would depict who the enemies are, and they would again target children at a very young age. There were many victims of the Holocaust. It wasn't just concentrated on the Jewish people. There was the Roma and Sinti, which are basically gypsies. They had targeted Germans with disabilities, homosexuals, especially homosexual men, Jehovah's Witness, and the Poles. This slide is just showing some of the things that Hitler believed and reinforces his ideal that he wanted world domination and he wanted German purists to be the people that rule. So there were lots of things that the Nazis did in the beginning to just discourage Jewish people. One of these is the boycott of the Jewish. It was only one day on April 1st, and Nazis executed a plan to target Jewish businesses and professionals. And they basically told people not to support their businesses. And there's different signs showing this boycott. And there was like different signs, lots of different protests for just people not to support them at all. And it only lasted a day, but it was a part of an overall scheme to start a protest and a campaign to restrict Jewish workers and destroy their businesses. Later on in the years 1935, there were the Nuremberg laws, which are two very distinctive laws, the Reach Citizenship Law and the Law for Protection of German Blood and German Honor. These laws basically define what true and pure Germans are, and they created more restrictions for non-Germans, specifically Jewish people. On the side right here, you can see a poster of a Jewish man and a German woman, and they basically created race defilement laws, which means that these two people um, they could not be in a relationship together, they could not get married, they had to stay separated. And they had a blood purity chart to just explain who a pure German would actually be and who a Jewish person would be. And they would use this chart to instill their laws and create the separation between the people. Destruction. There were lots of other ways that they created destruction from the Nazi Party. They had the Berlin book burning, which basically means that anything that they deemed non-German or pure German, they would burn all their books. They burned about 40,000 books just as a way to basically destroy their knowledge of anything that pertains to them. Then there was also the Enabling Act. This basically gave the reach, this was a way to allow the Reich government to issue laws without needing the approval of Germany's parliament, which was still established at the time period, because in 1933, Germany was still a democracy, but these laws basically allowed them to overrule that and install any law that they deem necessary. There was the burning of the German parliament, which is the Reichstag fire, which you can see right here, which basically they burned the building that the parliament was located. There was also the SS police, which were a special organization of police that would basically they would take out any plan that Adolf Hitler had and just be an army that would protect him and also instill the laws that he gave. Then there was Kristallnacht, which was a night that came later on in the years of the growing taking over by the Nazis. It was November 9th and 10th, and the violence spread in multiple locations in Germany where they annexed Austria and certain areas of Sweden. They were basically destroying anything related to Jewish people. They were breaking Jewish owned businesses, breaking their walls, and there was a lot of damage. It's known as the Night of Broken Glass because a lot of places were destroyed. Now we moved into the actual start of World War II, what created the violence that spread across the entire world. It was the invasion of Poland. So, just a little background, Hitler was constantly trying to take over many places around the world, specifically areas located by Germany, and he was constantly overtaking different smaller countries. France and Britain wanted him to stop, but they basically said, you can have one more country and then we want you to stop. You can't take over any more countries. Hitler agreed to this plan, but and while he agreed, he still went behind their backs and invaded Poland. And once he invaded Poland, they declared war on Germany, which started World War II. Then there was the euthanasia program, which is basically a program created to systematically kill Germans with disabilities. It started as a program aimed towards German children, and they wanted to kill German children with disabilities. So they would reach out to their parents and give them an opportunity to send them to a medical facility that was supposed to help them. But instead of helping them, it was actually giving doctors the license to kill these people in different ways that they would research. And eventually, the program extended to adults because it was so successful. It killed around 250,000 people with disabilities. And these are just a picture of the death register of how many people they killed. And then it shows like the bus transporting the different people with disabilities. One of the biggest parts of the Holocaust was the ghettos that they would put Jewish people in. This is something you've probably heard about because it is a big part of the history. There were lots of ghettos around the world, but it was basically a location that they would put Jewish people, a large amount of Jewish people in for a short time period once they were figuring out how they would kill them. They wanted to create a final solution that would effectively create their genocide and push it forward. So during the time period of finding out how they were going to be able to inflict so much death, they had them in one location separated from everyone so they could figure out what the next steps would be. This brings us to something that's probably very common with everyone else, concentration camps. Concentration camps began in 1933, and the first concentration camp is shown right here. And it was originally created just to imprison political offenders that had different views that were different from Nazis, and also the Jehovah's Witness, homosexuals, and people basically that were not necessarily had to be a Jew, but they just differed from everyone else. They were captured in large, massive amounts and sent to camps were it was basically a prison, but they were forced to do labor and would mass murder them in things such as gas chambers. And you can see the different people and the large amounts of people. Lots of people got sick at these camps, and they were in prison for just being themselves. However, concentration camps are not the only form of Nazi camps that were available at the time period. There were the concentration camps, of course, which is probably the most known, but they also have forced labor camps where they would basically just force their prisoners to do different labors. They had killing center camps, which is the only purpose of these camps is to kill the Jews. They would send them to these camps in various ways, such as boarding trains or walking, and the whole purpose of the camp was to just kill Jewish people. They also had prisoner of war camps. These camps were for people that were um, against the Germans, like the Allied soldiers that were captured. They were put into these prisoner of war camps, and that's where they stayed. There's also transit camps, which you can see right here. This is a video that just displays the boarding of the trains. I'll just play a little bit of it. It doesn't have any sound, but these are how the different people would board the trains that would take them to the different camps. And as you can see, they had the Star of David on them, which basically distinguished that they were a Jew. Of course, the reign of terror did not last forever, and as the German military began to collapse because they were losing the war, they wanted to continue their genocide, so they had to think of ways to continue to transport people and prisoners out of the Nazi camps because the Nazi camps began to be um, the allied the allied side began to go to Germany and see these different camps, and they were liberating the people. So as a way to keep the death going and the genocide to continue, they started death marches, which is basically when they would walk prisoners of these camps for miles and miles, essentially to a different camp or just somewhere to die. And the purpose of the walk was for them to die on the walk. They were either orchestrate a murder to kill them, they would allow the people to die from several different weaknesses of travel and several other serious conditions. These are just some examples of how they would walk through the different areas. These typically took place during the end of the World War, so 1944 to 1945 period. Then there were the war crimes. This is basically what happened after the Nazi Party was starting to diminish. Many leaders around the world, particularly from the Allied Council, began to put them on trial for their different murders. And it was established through the International Military Tribunal, which is shown right here. This is at Nuremberg. And of course, the major leaders of the world, like Adolf Hitler, he took his life before he was ever able to be put on trial. Once the war was ending and the concentration camps were coming to an end and Nazi reign was ending, there were different displacement camps because a lot of people had no longer had their homes. During the time period where Jewish people were taken from their homes were given to Germans to live in, and they would take it from them and they would not have anything to go back to. They would just have their family, which they would look for, but it wasn't anything that they could just go back to. So there were displacement camps created by the Allies and United Nations. And this was just an area for them to live in where they can find their families, have normal housing, and just try to get back into a routine of life after everything was taken away from them. It was designated for the survivors of the camps. Liberation. One of the highlights of the entire Holocaust is when people were actually able to leave these harsh conditions and try to work their ways back into a normal life. During the years of 1944 and 1945, this is when many Nazi camps began to be liberated. And the thing about this is it was also the time period where the rest of the world actually got to see how much hatred Germany had and what they were actually doing. Because many places have heard about it, but unfortunately, unlike today, it's not. We didn't have phones back then. We couldn't take pictures of it and show people and share it on social media. So it wasn't until actual soldiers arrived to this camps that they could see the harsh conditions that these people were actually in, and it really emphasized how much hatred Germany had and how much danger they had inflicted on so many people. However, the liberation of the camps were one of the first steps to show the world the terror and expose the truth. It just worked toward a new day in life where people could move forward and go back to home or go to displaced camps and find their families. This shows one of the first camps to be liberated, which was in 1939. And this also shows lots of the survivors, and it's many people that are in the crowd. The state of the survivors. After going through so much terror, it is no shock that people are not always in their best state of mind or physical state. There was overwhelming disease in the camps, which a lot of people died from. So survivors were still sick when they got out the camps. There was lack of proper care, and they withheld them from proper food and nutrition. So many people were very weak and frail. There was years of maltreatment, extreme weakness, and struggles to move their body, and harsh conditions led victims to resemble skeletons. The picture over here is kind of a play on someone who has been a survivor of the camp, but is taking a picture next to a skeleton. Many people actually looked like you could see their bones and how frail and weak they were, and they weren't able to move. It kind of just depicts like how bad it can get. Life after the Holocaust. Once World War II ended and the Nazi reign began to fall, victims were left the duty to rebuild. Most victims were able to leave camps, but they were severely displaced, as mentioned before, and they had many financial burdens. Also, many people had to find their families. They didn't know if the people they came in the camps were still alive, they had passed away, where they were located. So it was a very long process of just trying to come back to a normal life and find people and understand who passed away and who didn't. There were 80,000 survivors in particular that relocated to the United States. In this picture right here, you can see one of the survivors. His name is Norman, and he was able to find his wife after the Holocaust. This is a picture that he had taken from 2004. And these are actual survivors of the Holocaust. Right here is Thomas with his mother. He went into the Holocaust while he was rather young. He was still a child. And this short shows how much he was grown through the Holocaust, was able to move forward. This is a picture of three young ladies that went into the Holocaust. One of them was not able to survive. However, two of them did survive. And these are just some statements from the people that survived that we'll just take a few minutes to listen to.
The Netherlands, February 27th, 2001.
We are at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, in my office at the court, on a very sort of dark, dreary day.
Judge Thomas Bergenthal is well known as a leading advocate of international human rights law and for his pioneering work in international law. In March of 2000, he was elected the American judge for the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, the International Court of Justice.
It's a court where you deal only with disputes between states. So for an international lawyer like me, this is a dream court and a dream come true. It's like being on the Supreme Court of the United States. This is the court that determines what is and what is not international law. Not that we are that important, but in terms of those of us who believe in international law and practice international law, this is the mecca to which you look. I should tell you that the notice to me that I was going to be the nominee of the United States for the court came to me while I had just done a visit to Auschwitz, my second visit, and I was in Krakow. I'd just come back from it.
So this basically gives a little bit of details about how even though he went through so much as a child, he was still able to come out strong and be a international judge, which is a great accomplishment. This is another remark from a survivor. Her name is Blanca.
San Diego, California. It's Passover, a holiday that conjures up memories of another country and another time.
My mother and father were non-observant Jews. However, the tradition was kept up. We went for all the big holidays to grandparents who kept the Judaism alive, and they were religious. They were not Orthodox, but they were religious. I will never forget the Seders, the warm feeling of being with all my family and with strangers, because we always, my grandparents invited strangers. This was a tradition from orphanage, soldiers who were of Jewish origin who did not have place to go to. And they had a cook and a serving maid, and there was a long, long table laden with this food, and the people and the happiness and the lights, because my grandfather always said, let there be a lot of light, it's a holiday. So all the lights in all the rooms were on. It was such a wonderful, happy feeling.
I'm going to give some details about her life and the things she went through in the Jewish culture, which spreads lights on the actual character of the Jewish people. This brings us to the end of the presentation, and I wanted to end with a quote by Eli Wiesel. He is a survivor of the Holocaust that went on to write books and build his success. Even in the darkness, it is possible to create light. I ended it with a picture of Jewish children that survived the Holocaust, well, that came out the other end of the Holocaust at the end, and just to see the smiles on their faces as they're able to try to regain normalcy. This presentation is supposed to show us how people were able to overcome the Holocaust, but remind us of the importance of its horror and that we will never repeat such hatred again in the world. This is the end of my presentation. And does anyone have any questions or slides they would like me to revisit to learn more information on them?
Well, I would like to say great job, Amber. What is something that you learned? What was like the most interesting fact that you learned during this um, internship?
I think there's a lot of information that we learned through the different Zoom meetings and the Gather Town meetings, but the one that stuck out to me the most was the slide about how they killed people that were disabled, because I didn't know they had an actual program that was just focused on killing people. The program was focused on killing children at first, which I thought was very crazy. And the way that they targeted children was very sick to me, because they wanted to instill these values so young in in these children, and they had entire programs that were created just for children that believed in the Nazi Party and their policies, which I thought was pretty crazy, because they're still children. They can't develop a mind for their own. So I didn't really like that, but it is something that stuck out to me the most. Any other questions or slides?
At
So this question says, what is my opinion about Hitler? I personally do not like Hitler at all. And I feel like there's some that he got the easy way out because he was able to kill himself. And he inflicted so much hatred on people and was able to change so many people's minds, and I just feel like he should have gotten a worse punishment than death. And he was able to kill himself, which doesn't seem very fair at all. And if I was ever able to like sit in the room and talk with him, I would really want to understand what made him have this mindset. Because if you look at the history of Jews, they have constantly dealt with different hatred towards their group. But what made him want to kill everyone? That's what I would want to know if I ever talked to him. Another question that came in the chat was How should we continue to use the information you shared today? And do you think this could happen again? At first, I would say continue to use the information I shared today by just thinking about what happened, bringing awareness to the Holocaust, spreading different facts if you can, because I feel like a lot of people don't know all the small details of it. They understand the general picture, but they don't understand how bad it really was. And as we saw in the very beginning video, lots of people feel like it was a lie or it wasn't true, which is crazy because there's so many people affected by it, and to just say that, oh, this didn't happen to one culture is very sad. So hopefully we can just share that this did happen and resources to understand that this happened. And do I think this could happen again? I really hope that it would not happen again, but I feel like there are too many programs in place for a genocide of this level to happen again, but there are genocides that could probably take place in smaller countries if they don't have the resources to share that it's going on. And hopefully with the day and age of social media, it will never get to a point that is this big. And the United Nations has different programs to stop countries from so much terror. However, there have been genocides after the Holocaust, so I'm not completely 100% certain that a genocide will never happen again, but something on this platform should not happen again. But it does make me upset that there are people that still believe in these different beliefs, as we've seen through the several marches that have happened in the recent years. People still have the Nazi swastika going around and spreading this hatred. So hopefully we can get to a point that it ends, but for the time period, we'll just work towards a better future. And another question in the chat was, do you think I would be able to survive the Holocaust? Personally, after understanding everything that they went through, I don't know. I feel like the only way to truly survive is to keep your head down and just try to get through it the best you can. Because if you spoke out, they would kill you on sight because these people walking around with guns. We actually went through a scenario during the program was, would you pick one thing over another? So one of the things that we focused on was they were on a train and they had the ability to either jump off this train as it's moving, and they don't know where this train is sending them. It could be sending them to a killing center. It could be sending them to a forced labor camp. They don't know where they're going. And the question was, would you jump off the train? A young man was on the train with his mother, and he is trying to decide whether or not he should jump off or stay with his mother. And I personally decide when I thought about it, I said that he would jump off because I didn't think that he would want to stay with his mother because his friends were jumping off as well, and they had a plan orchestrated to move past it. However, he stayed with his mother, and he did it. He actually ended up going to a concentration camp, so hopefully he was able to survive. But it's just small decisions like that that just, I think, determine whether or not you stay alive, because those people that jumped, what's going to happen to them once they're off the train? They might be met with different Nazis and people that are going to kill them on site once they jump off. So I think that there's just a lot of different scenarios that you have to understand that go along with Holocaust. So for me, I think the only way that I'd be able to survive is if I kept my head down and tried to just ignore most of the horror that happened, which is very hard to do when you're in a situation where you're constantly being put down, because you're going to want to speak out. And especially in this day and age, I think my generation in particular is just, we don't hold our tongue at a lot of different scenarios. So it would be harder for our generation, at least, to go through what they did. So I don't know. That's a good question. Thank you all for the nice comments in the chat. I appreciate it. And I think this room is about to close in 5 minutes. If anyone else had any questions, last minute insight, any slides that they want to go back to. Thank you guys for the comments. And then just a little bit of detail for after the presentation, we are going back to a ceremony. And since I'm the class representative, I'll be giving a speech, and I have to do a pledge for my class. So you all can stick around for that, or you're welcome to go on with the rest of your day. We can just wait until the room's closed because they close in.
And more question. So
Yeah.
what what did you use when you created the rooms? And because that was interesting how you kind of moved from one room to another. It was a cool way to present.
Thank you. So we were actually introduced to a lot of different programming during this ambassadorship. So this program is called eMaze, which is basically an actual virtual exhibit. So this was pre-created and we could just fill in information like a PowerPoint, but it goes through an actual exhibit, like you're virtually there. That's the program that was used. Thank you guys for all the sweet comments. I think my screen is about to stop sharing and then we'll go in the room shortly.